Yale.
Wonderful. So I want to introduce that co-moderating this Q&A will be Professor Albert Laguna, an associate professor in ethnicity, race, and migration, and Professor Quan Tran. They will start with a few questions, and then there will also be the opportunity for you, the audience, to pose questions to Kristina. All right, I'll turn it over to you two, Quan.
All right, thank you, Diana. Thank you, Kristina, for that tremendous performance. It took me on a roller coaster of emotions and speaks to the power of culture and the power of our vote. So very much inspired by this. So why don't we start with just a broad question. If you could let us know how your path to comedy and performance happened, that would be a great opening for this conversation.
Well, I actually joke that a lot of how I ended up doing this is because I could never find I wasn't like actually allowed to see a therapist when I was a kid. It was very shameful. And so being seen publicly was like its own therapy. And I had actually imagined out of college that I was going to be a very serious performance artist, doing like dark and twisted things in galleries and moving slowly and would do long durational work, and people would respond to that work with, "You're so funny." And I was like, that was my soul. Like, what was that? So I just began to be introduced more and more in spaces as a comedian. It was a very scary term to embrace because I feel like there are very kind of commercial expectations of saying you're a comedian. There's very like it has to look like this, and you have to make me laugh, and you don't have to be on all the time. But I think that's not true. This is just what my comedy looks like, and it's what it is. And if it doesn't fit your vision of it, go away, because I'm at this point too old to try to wrestle with making you happy. So it's only in the last like 10 years I've been like, okay, I'm gonna tell people I'm a comedian, and it means sometimes having a conversation when people invite me, can you do 5 minutes on a mic? And I'm like, not really, because I have this sort of whole thing I do. But yeah, that's sort of been the journey, but a lot of it has sort of came out of coping, honestly.
So Kristina, I teach the class on race and comedy. And it's a tough class because I feel like students come like excited, we're gonna talk about comedy, then it's like more and more depressing as the weeks go by, as we look at the history of racial representation in comedy. I'd love for you to talk about the strengths and limitations of comedy for thinking about race.
So this is something I feel like I've dealt with in a lot of my shows, and why I tend to gravitate towards more theater spaces is I think there's a patience in a theater or gallery space that there is not in a commercial comedy space. And I feel like in a commercial comedy space, I have to sort of play to a very lowest common denominator and give my mother an accent she doesn't have, or you're Chinese when. And I feel like in theater, the reason, like most of my shows, I feel like the first 20 minutes is me teaching an audience how to watch the show and me. And you don't really get afforded that time. Like, okay, let me like very quickly sum up why it is I'm speaking English, and why it is this is my worldview, and why it is I'm a performance artist, and why it is like this one. I think I kind of move very quickly, and I'm just hoping the audience gets pulled along for the ride and are not like, well, why is she a doctor? Or like they're like stuck on narratives that they feel they need to watch me play out. I don't have time for that. I got to tell you about neighborhood council. I have no time. So I'm just hoping you just come along for the ride. But I do feel like there's a lot more prefacing that people of color need to do to kind of give a little rubric for how they're read that white comedians don't have to deal with. Like that some people just have to explain what a Muslim is, right? Or just have to explain like, just basic things that aren't taught in the world of culture.
Great, thank you, Kristina. That helped me raise the next question, in the sense that you have characterized your work as guerrilla performance and a form of cultural jamming. Could you elaborate a little bit on these concepts and why you're drawn to them?
Yeah, so and this ties back into the TV pilot that I described, which was going to be this whole guerrilla thing, but I think very much I'm informed by the context that I grew up in San Francisco. I live in Los Angeles. I have the privilege of having been surrounded by a lot of Asian American centered communities. And so for me to do things like crash a Miss Chinatown pageant is funny in the context of LA Asian American culture. For most people, the beauty pageant queens who are crashed on don't find it very funny, but like, and the people running the pageant don't think it's funny, but like that they get that archetype and that I'm stereotyping it. Now, if I show up in some town where there's no Miss Chinatown pageant dressed as a fake Miss Chinatown, and I have tried this, people get really confused and they're like, is this really a beauty queen? Like, what's happening? And that's sort of what the issue sort of was with this show that I pitched was, was sort of used to making these guerrilla projects where have a very specific audience that doesn't necessarily know the same rubric that I'm dealing with nationally, and True TV very much is a flyover state comedy network, and they're kind of sheepish about naming certain political things, and it felt like, oh, like all these things I can do in the world of LA are this big for my very patient college educated audience, but people are still need to react to this, and like it's almost they can't conceive of what is she doing. Like we need an explanation of why she is like this first before we can even watch her do pranks, right? Because they're reading me through a very specific lens. So I'm drawn to guerrilla work because it doesn't require me getting permission to get into a space. I love the theater of the way people perform unintentionally. I think politicians are constantly performing. I think everyone who has a social media account is performing. And so I love subverting those performances. I think my whole theory is we were all reality TV stars at this point, whether we want to or not. We all have the ability to cancel or be canceled. And it's a scary, frightening thing. We can scream back and feel like we can tweet back at Trump and feel like I did something when, maybe I didn't or didn't. But yeah, that's my interest in that work. But I was really drawn to artists who, as I dug through the names, I was like, they're all white. Michael Moore, Nathan Fielder, Sacha Baron Cohen, the Yes Men who do guerrilla work and do amazing kind of political work. And I'm like, where are the examples of people of color who are able to sort of invade spaces in the same way and at least get commercial recognition or those rewards? And I wasn't seeing it.
So we want to also get the students on camera to have you ask questions directly. So we're going to start with Amy. Amy, you going to jump on, turn your camera on?
Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you for being here. So my question is related to the topic of audience. So do you write and perform for a particular audience in mind? And if so, do you consider how intentions may be perceived differently by other audiences who do watch your work in good faith?
I think about like myself as an audience member, and I would try to write something that I would feel proud of. And there's a certain brand of humor that I feel panders, and I don't want to write that. Like I want to surprise myself in the writing process and feel like, yeah, I'd sit and watch that, and I'm not just delivering up accent jokes or whatever. I do think about the fact that I will be touring colleges a lot because that's sort of in the venues I normally tour. So like, that's why I don't have a 6,000 pound set that needs to be freighted in. That's why I like sew my own set pieces that can roll up and show up. Like if you give me the crappiest cafeteria, and this has happened on my other shows which have tech, I show up like to a venue and it's a cafeteria and I'm like, oh boy, like I have. And so for this particular show, I think I was like, well, I don't want to use any video. And of course, the great irony is I couldn't even tour it because of the pandemic, and video ended up being the actual medium. But I do think about like what I have access to and the situations I'm probably going to be thrown into, and how to work with those parameters. So this is one of the first pieces in a while that has no video, because I've always had some sort of projection or something, and I was like, I'm so sick of relying on a video projector, which might go kaput on me But we did add some stuff for this because we can. We added the pictures of the dog and the suffragettes, and that was something that was not part of the live show. Does that answer? Any more questions?
So along that line, Isabel has another question about audience and reception to your work. Isabel, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and performing for us.
Thank you.
Really transformed what I thought was possible on Zoom.
Oh, yay!
So my question for you was, there's often the critique of Asian American artists and comedians perpetuating anti-Blackness through their use of like African American vernacular English and like appropriation of Black culture and so forth. So how would you respond to this criticism, and how does it influence your own approach to comedy and performing?
Yeah, that would have been a really good question to ask me for my last show, the Wong Street Journal. I mean, you tell me if you, I did kind of track and I think about these things because I read the critique articles. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be a subject of one of those articles, like, you know. but I think it's definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot more in my work in the last few years, because of this sort of public kind of conversation around it. My last show was the Wong Street Journal, and I actually went to Uganda and made a rap album. And you want to talk about every landmine you can possibly fall into for that criticism, that I was in it. And I didn't intentionally make a rap album. I literally meant I was going to volunteer, and I thought I was going to write a play about microloans, and end up meeting these guys. And it was interesting because hip hop and rap is very much of an American genre, right? That is taken over everywhere. And I had a lot of critics who didn't watch the full show do it, but I did feel like in thinking about anti-Blackness in the show, and like someone had once called out that using the term hella is using African American vernacular, but I learned that from Asian fobs in middle school. In the schoolyard, they would say hella. Like I was like, what? I can't use that anymore. Like it's so Bay Area to me. So I guess I think for me, I don't know that I can remove everything from my language, but I do want to at least set up in sort of the very critical first scene or 10, 20, 15 minutes as you get to know me, that I have a certain awareness around certain issues of race that I am actively trying, even if I don't get everything right, I am actively thinking about that. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think about it. I feel confused where some of this goes, because some of it is so just some of these things which is considered African American vernacular are so embedded in how I already communicate. I think just from having living in the city and it didn't. I don't know where it came from. And then someone explains that this is actually this AAVE term, and I'm like, why? Yeah, I don't have a complete answer to that, but I do think that it is something that comedians need to get smarter about sort of addressing when they're called on it. And yeah, that's sort of the shift that I hope happens, is that I hope it doesn't mean like suddenly erasing everything in their set, but at least recognizing that this is coming up. I feel like that was a disappointing answer, but that's what I have. Chetan?
Yeah, question from the acting performance side of it. What, to shift gears a little bit, what differences have you found, like I've been dealing with this in my own work, but what differences have you seen for like a Zoom audience and digital for camera work versus like live, actually being able to hear the audience laugh?
It's hard. Luckily, this premiered for an audience in what was the greatest show of my life in February. And I felt like I was in my own comedy special. And, and so when the shutdown happened, Diana's like, we can probably still do it online. I'm like, no, like, how am I going to go from all this screaming and like silence? But I, in the pandemic, like wiped all the lines out of my head. So I had to rewatch the video of me performing, and that helped me hear the pauses and gaps for laughter and anticipate. And I'm not holding as long, and they were long pauses, but so that helped. But I think it's thinking about the shift that Diana helped direct me, that it's not like, I'm not projecting like Kimberly Guilfoyle at the RNC, like instead of it's like, hey, it's just you at home and me at home, and it's much more intimate. So that has been a big blocking shift. And the fact that like, rather than like clean up my house and pretend it's a neutral space, is to use sort of the natural dramaturgy of the house, of like, because we can't have a light change or a shift or whatever. And I still have to live in this space. So we just use it to create new scenes and colors and shifts. And this is what my proudest thing is I'm like, I don't have to just remember lines. I have to remember to move things. So this is my system. It's a chair with 2 Tupperwares that I put this on. And so it's not just like remember a line and walk. I have to remember to move this and like, do stuff like that. So it's a different vocabulary. I'm really glad we got to premiere it before. I don't know what it's like to premiere a piece. I mean, I do, because I'm working on this sweatshop Overlord piece, but yeah, I think it's crazy. I had to learn 3 ways to do this. One for a live audience, one for my house, and then we shot this on Monday for cameras in a theater. But that I also had to focus. It was a hybrid between the live show and a Zoom show, and that rather than look at empty seats where no one's sitting, I would just directly address a big camera.
So I think Gabriella's next with a question.
Yes. First off, wanted to thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
I had a question specifically concerning your TV pilot and the distillation of comedy to wider audiences. So you noted how you had to kind of like tone down your comedy and have your culture become the butt of the joke in order to appeal to like wider white audiences. And so along those lines, I was wondering how you think media and racial representation work together. Do you think that racial representation in media, especially in terms of comedy, is worth pursuing when we have to change it so much just to make it make sense to white people?
I think it's a pipeline issue of power and who's in charge. And like I like it was clear. Like I think I could have had a successful pilot if I got to hire people who I mean, it was just hard. It was all white gatekeepers in the situation. They were like so nervous. It's like, I think you know who I am, but but you're so nervous around. It's like they didn't even like the idea of me being too political. Instead, it was a do-gooder, right? Like they even kind of like wiped that down in the pilot, and it was just like, I think things just have to say stuff. Like you can't. I think trying to pussyfoot around words like feminism and stuff like that, and just try to pretend that for middle America it looks like some sort of more amorphous, vague thing won't work. And that's what they were trying to do, that rather than name exact issues, that it was just like, Kristina just likes to fix and help people. And that became kind of dangerous, right? In the sense that I felt like I became confused. Like, wait, do I even care about this issue, or am I like Dennis the Menace that just comes and screws up like what real activists are trying to do here? So it was just a really confusing process. I think we need more people of color making decisions at the top and making clear where tastes lie. And I feel like as frustrated as I am that we have to go to war with everything on Twitter, it seems to be one of the few things that can actually move the needle, that can like the Oscars so white hashtag actually help shift to get more people of color in the Oscars in the voting pool and stuff like that. And but it was a tough thing when I was in that room, because it was like, I can't take the angry college activist approach and go to war with everyone in this room, because I'm still trying to work with them. And they still, at the end of the day, have this power. And that's what is so hard and frustrating, is I would just find myself just sort of smiling and going along with stuff. And I, had very few allies. Like the only allies were the white women, right? Like that was like the closest I could find to like kind of vet for me. And they missed things too. So yeah, I wish there were more execs at the top who, and a lot of it is, those white execs can handhold, not the white execs, the execs of color can help handhold the people who are like, ooh, I don't know this. And like, no, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. And that's how stuff gets moved in. Like after Radical Cram School, the same web series that Alex Jones like went to war with me about, Disney called us. And we were all like, oh my God, are we gonna be able to buy big houses in Malibu? And it was the the low rung folks who work with the VPs, and they're like, we're all about dismantling the patriarchy in here. This is too much, but what else do you have? And I love that. Like, it literally felt like they opened the curtain, kind of like let the rats run through, and and they were women of color, right? But their higher ups were white folks. So so it's a slow, long process, but it needs the whole pipeline needs to shift on up. So not even just the talent, but those who make decisions.
Great. Next up, we have Dora following up with a question.
Hi, thank you so much. On the note of like Alex Jones, what is your best advice as a woman in comedy and a woman of color in comedy on like how not to give it to people like that, and how to identify whose criticisms,
Yeah.
Your art?
I mean, you think about who you care, who's the audience you care about, and play for those crowds. So I get, when I get invited to play for more white spaces, I get nervous, and I don't turn it down necessarily, but I try to get as much information as possible to figure out what I'm going to present so that it goes over well. But I also tend to play theater spaces because those audiences don't heckle you, where some of these other spaces will. But not get, I mean, I've been trolled for 20 years, right? Since my bigbadchinese.mama.com, and I've had people send me hate mails on and off, and it took that was sort of the crowning moment of trolldom, for me to go, you know what, I made it through 20 years of this, I can make it another 20. And if you're going to make an enemy, that's the enemy you want to make. And we also, like, among our producers, we were like, what are we going to do? Do we respond to this? Do we just delete stuff? Do we hide? And then we were like, let's shoot a second season. So, it's just like, but it's taken this, I don't think 20 years I would have had those. I guess would have panicked and maybe just disappeared. But I think they want you to go away, and you have to be like, it's a lot of self-talk. It's been a lot of self-help books. It's like, I have to still say yes to myself before I leave the door every day, before I want anyone to say yes to, before I expect anyone to say yes to me or give me an opportunity. And I have to, like, you have to be somewhat delusional in the sense, like, nope, I'm just gonna do this, and there's gonna be lots of haters. And it's a terrible use of energy to try to bring down people's careers and cancel people. I actually try to avoid canceling people as much as possible if I can't find a way to be funny about it. Yeah, but I just like go, all right, that's a great use of your time, you dum-dum. So yeah, but it's I understand that it's not an easy thing, but I guess I just 20 years of building this thick skin, I'm just like, no one's shown up at the house, so I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's okay, and I've locked down my info. And it also goes in waves. Like, they get mad at for like 2 weeks or a few days, and then they move on to the next person to get mad at and attack. I know it's like it's so terrible. Like, it's just sort of like, yeah, that's what it is. But I guess I just, and just make more work, and I'll make more shows from this that people probably be pissed off at. So just like, okay.
Our next question is from Quay.
Hi, I loved your performance today.
Thank you, Quay.
I was wondering if you know the reactions of how older, like, Asian American people engage with your comedy, and like what reactions are elicited from them, and if you know, like, the one Facebook support group that's like Asian Americans with Republican parents support group.
Oh, I don't have one of those. I don't have Republican parents, so I haven't had to join that. But I love that there's.
How do you think how can comedy be used to address like political tensions between like different generations, especially if language barriers or like different?
I wonder if my mom is still in the room. Let me see. Hey, mommy, you want to get on? No.
Nope.
Okay, she don't want to get on. Okay. But I feel like these shows are my most honest conversations with my parents. So I don't know. I know that's a crazy answer because not everyone invites their folks to come see their work. It's funny how she got on. This is my mother's cameo, everybody. I don't know. I think, how is it just bridge? I guess for if anything, it's just like to first to like I love that the support group is like other people with Republican parents, like trying to comfort each other, right? So maybe you make work first to just comfort each other, like, oh Jesus, why do we live with this? You're not going to convert them necessarily overnight or get them to switch sides. But I think there's something wonderful in at least going, okay, we have each other. We might not have our parents right now, but we have each other.
Okay,
I don't know. It's a community, right? We're slowly building of comfort.
Thanks, Kristina. So happy to see your mom here. Welcome, and it's great to always have. Seriously, like I think I wish sometimes that for all of us in the things that we do, we can show our parents more frequently. On that note, I think maybe next up would be Hector, who has a question about. Well, Hector can ask the question.
Hi, thank you for your performance. My question is more of your influences growing up, both in terms of maybe professional comedians or influences in your family.
Yeah, I think my mother is actually quite hilarious, and my father is he was sold insurance, but they would have these like parties, like retirement parties, and he always like do these skits. And even when he turned 40 years old, he'd like lip sync a Johnny Mathis song to my mother, and I just think like they're actually quite funny. Aren't you funny, mommy? Okay, anyway.
How is your
She
mom?
is, but just really dry things that I think it was advice, but I think it was just like so hilarious. Like I don't none of this advice actually works if I'm not a dead person hiding all the time. I wish you'd share a zinger with them, mommy.
No, that's okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, what else? Oh, Lucille Ball. I love Perfect Strangers. Mork and Mindy. Three's Company. Like all those like really cheesy shows. I grew up TGIF, like Full House. And then like when I got to college, I like sort of unleashed my angry side and was like, oh, look at all this whole side of myself I was repressing this whole time, and was so into like this like dark, slow moving performance art where people perform in bathrooms and draw on themselves, and there's no beginning and no end to the show. And I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And I was just like really just sort of fascinated with this genre of work they call endurance work or performance art. And I think somewhere between comedy and that is sort of where I ended up making like, so I still do this show that I can repeat, whereas it's like a lot of these performance art shows you can only perform once because you only get yourself shot in the arm once. You can only, shave your head while you'd read a poem once. Yeah, so I feel like it's a lot of that, but I'm really like, I love the show I pitched was like I want to do Michael Moore meets Nathan For You, and I want to like go out and prank people and have that edited together and have this like amazing final TV show moment that folks see.
Thank you.
So our next question is from Sam.
Hey, hello. Just another question of just about how you envision your audience. So I know like this show is definitely very focused on the US, but like a lot of your other performance work has been around like Asian Americans. And I was wondering if you've had any like responses from Asians like in Asia and other diasporic places and how like they responded to your work.
Yeah, I'll be quite honest. My show does not, or my past work, and I think part of me like had this dream of like, I want to tour internationally. And I was like, wow, the Asian American identity does not really translate well in other, like you got to take it way down and real basic. And so the example I name is Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is a big fringe festival in Scotland. And like I described them as 90s solo shows about identity. We're doing really well there. Like this is a fictitious name of a show, but like I'm Pakistani. I'm Pakistani in a woman show. And it wasn't very good, right? These kind of shows that are like, these are the different kinds of, did you know we have different kinds of personalities? Like these multi-character shows that I thought were like, it's not the aesthetic that I like, went over so well there. And I'm just like, this is so stupid. Like it's like people going, oh, race for the first time. And And so I did a show called Going Green the Wong Way over there, and like the audience was like, who cares? I did bring the Wong Street Journal to Nigeria. That was like, some of the audience appreciated, those who work for NGOs and stuff, like folks who are sort of living in the in-between appreciated. Nigerians have a very different way of watching US theater. Like they watch it like it's a music concert, so they'll walk in and out. At least my show, they'll just text openly, take selfies with each other, and I'm like still talking, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so stressful. And like a lot of the, just a lot of the context just didn't really, like, I mean, they were very nice to me, but it just didn't translate. And so I think for this show, I was just like, I'm fine. I'd rather play the audiences that really I feel like I'm myself in, and an audience can dig in on, and that's, you know, like I don't need to tour this all over the world. I'm fine to just play this for the context of Americans to understand that we're in an election cycle right now, and that's what this was for me, was a show that would and it's dream came true, except that there's a global pandemic and maybe fascism coming next week, you know. But I wanted it to really play in this context, and for an American audience, for people dealing with voting for the first time, which is a lot of you folks. That's what I wanted this to be.
Okay, Kristina, last question for tonight. I'm sure our audience are curious about what's next for you in terms of performances and work that you're doing.
Oh, what am I doing next? Sorry. Oh,
other projects you might be working on right now? What do you
got? Oh yeah, it's running the Auntie Sewing Squad, which is a very different kind of performance. In that I sewed all this stuff, and then first week of the pandemic was like, I'm going to sew masks because I'm not essential, but if I sew masks, I'll be essential. And 7 months later, our group is still sewing masks, which is ridiculous because we live in America. Why are we sewing masks for people? But unfortunately, it's like systemic racism. Is like, to me, it was like this gesture of like, oh, all health matters. But then it becomes very clear that yes, all our health matters, but there are people whose health is actually in way worse shape because of this pandemic, and they tend to be Indigenous communities, Black communities, incarcerated communities, undocumented communities, and that's who we're still working on supporting the health of. So we're doing this coat drive, a warm coat drive for Standing Rock. I say this because you're in Connecticut, and you might have gained so much coronavirus pandemic weight that you have an extra winter coat. We have an address at auntiesewing-squad.com. You can directly mail your old winter clothes to Standing Rock. We've just gotten really deep into this. Like I was just like, this is supposed to be like a 2-3 week stopgap. And suddenly hundreds of us are still like running around and collecting things so that people don't freeze to death. We're getting medical supplies to Standing Rock. We're doing relief drives in Navajo Nation. We sent a bunch of KN95s to farm workers affected by the fires. So that's a project, and I think we're going to be here till the end of the pandemic. We actually have a book deal, which is crazy, like something I would have loved in my career outside of this, but it had to come down to starting a shadow FEMA to make happen. And then I'm working on a new show called Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord, which I hope will unfold into a piece called the Auntie Retirement Party. So we've been talking about, we joke a lot as aunties that we're going to one day retire and meet each other, but it's become really clear. It's like, yeah, we can just retire and stop, but the problem will still be there. And so what does it mean to actually retire and move away from it? I think this is a conversation a lot of organizations are having, especially theater organizations, that they've been producing shows at such a rapid pace that they haven't stopped to kind of check how white supremacy is embedded in their leadership structures and their funding structures and their programming decision making. And now is this moment to think, how do we want to shift forward? And for me with the aunties, I'm just like, what do we do with this community of care that we've created, which has been so powerful? Do we continue? Do we just walk away and that's it? Do we exist as a cultural force? Like, what does retirement mean for a group like us? So that's a very conceptual piece I'm stewing on right now.
Well, Kristina, thank you again so much for this performance, for taking the time to answer our questions. Thanks to Diane and the rest of your crew for making everything just feel so seamless and tight. It was I can't believe you pulled it off. Just to think of like a performance on Zoom, I kept asking my students like, this must be tough, right? Because there's a thing about Yale students. They've all been in theater in some way when they were in high school. I have a thesis about
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a very Yale thing. There's a lot of like actors come out of Yale and come into Yale. And
yeah. Talking about that complexity of doing this on Zoom. So it was fantastic. And yeah, thanks again. Kwan, do you have any parting thoughts? Thanks to the audience, everyone who tuned in. Really appreciate you taking the time with the Zoom fatigue.
No, I think Diana, you're going to take us away, right?
Yeah. Yes, I can do that. Let me strike up some music. And I think as we head out, just want to, the whole show is to go encourage everybody to vote. So please vote.
That's the biggest thing.
Push everyone who hasn't voted to vote. Doesn't matter what for. Just get your voice out there.
If you if you want to recommend this show to someone, this was the last show in my house before election. But Center Theater Group is we filmed it on Monday and it's going to be airing starting Friday. It's only $10 and you get a 30-day window to watch it. Oh, oops, I sent it privately to Chayton. Sorry.
I mean, I was gonna send it somewhere anyway. So.
but please, yeah, like this is a big experiment for poor theater companies right now. Are like, are we TV networks? And so I'm like the first fully staged show they took a chance on. So please sing it the praises, because it's no small thing that they were like, you, Kristina Wong, Asian woman, whose opinions are what they are. You're going to be the first show that's fully staged in the series. So I'd like to have a big gold opening and and show their support for this work.
And this way you can share it with your families if you dug the show. This is the easiest way to share it with everyone else.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, folks, for your wonderful comments.
All right.